Is recording on? Well, recording has started, I believe. So this is Gaurav Varatkar here and Harsh Kumar. They are both PhD students with me, and they are going to be your TAs in this course. By the way, I've started recording the meeting, and the reason for recording, of course, is all of our lectures are going to be recorded, and we'll put them all online so that people who can't attend live lectures, or if you want to brush them up later and so on, those will be available. So Gaurav and Harsh, their email addresses will also be shared on Moodle, and they are of course on the course team. So you can bug them at both those places. Both of them have a lot of experience in astrophysics. Harsh has done a lot of work in the automation of the Growth India telescopes. So you are going to be in great hands working with them. So thanks. Let me get back to sharing this. You can switch off your cameras if you want. Of course, you're welcome to leave them on. And he's gone immediately. Okay, so back to uh, astronomy in a nutshell. This is what hopefully you will learn by the end of the course, but we can probably do it in a bit more detail than this. So here's what I would like to actually hear from you. What is astronomy? What is astrophysics? What exactly are we talking about here? Uh, I'm going to simply sit and stare at the camera until I get, at least 5 or 6 answers from people. Anyone?
Study of anything that the human eye sees when we look up.
Okay, study of anything that human eye sees when we look up. Okay, let's take some notes here. Uh, what is A&E? Study of. Meanwhile, others can continue giving answers. Could you repeat that, please? Wow, looks like we are going to have a really long semester. A lot of the videos are just going to be me staring at the camera.
Astronomy is watching and astrophysics is interpreting.
Okay, so astronomy is watching and astrophysics is interpreting. Okay,
Astronomy, like we can say that astronomy is basically the study of patterns of stars that we see,
okay,
like in the sky.
study of patterns of stars.
And like various like similar phenomena. Um,
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Study of any celestial object or any kind of phenomenon related to it.
Okay, so from stars we have proceeded to any celestial object. So this is either, whichever way you look at it, what we are having right now is a very curious situation, right? We have either 74 people in this class who have no idea what astronomy and astrophysics is and are really willing to take a full semester course for figuring out exactly what it is. Or there is another possibility, which is that astronomy kind of falls in the category of subjects which are obvious. You know what it means, but it becomes a bit hard to describe what exactly it is. So, for example, you can see that some of these definitions here are beginning to get cyclic. What is a celestial object? Anything up in the sky. Okay. Study of anything we see when we look up? Well, not quite. I mean, I am seeing the fan above me here. I wouldn't quite call it astronomy. So you have to push it beyond. It has to be study of things outside the Earth. But then studying the Earth as an exoplanet, for example, or as a planet is very much part of astronomy and astrophysics. So what else would you put in this? We have heard of stars. What other objects would you think of when you're thinking about astronomy?
Galaxies.
Okay, we have galaxies. What
Dark
else?
matter,
Dark
planets,
matter.
Black holes.
Planets,
Black holes.
comets.
Okay,
Voids.
dark
white dwarfs,
matter.
Other planets, asteroids.
Void dwarf, black holes,
Neutron
planets.
Comets.
Voids.
nebulas,
Okay, now we are
Dark matter.
talking. Yes, we have dark matter,
Cosmology.
asteroids,
dark
comet,
energy,
Quasars.
dark energy. What was the other one?
nebulas,
White holes.
Nebulae. Okay, and then I heard white hole.
Neutron stars.
Neutron.
Okay, neutron stars. What about wormholes?
wormholes, yeah.
Okay.
Elementary
Okay.
particles.
Elementary particles. That is quite interesting a point actually. So there is a field called astroparticle
Gravitational
physics.
waves,
For
can we add?
example, yes, we can add gravitational waves.
Vacuum,
Okay, so talking about particles, okay, so Professor Vikram Rentala and his group, for example, do a lot of work on what is called astroparticle physics. So elementary particles coming from space is a field of study. But if you think of elementary particles, then the usual area that we would refer to is actually astroparticle physics. If you are talking of it in the astro context, but it would be the broader area of particle physics itself, a lot of which has been studied on terrestrial labs. What astronomy does give you though, and that is a very interesting point. Okay, so what you get is the most extreme phenomena in the universe. Okay, so when you're talking about, say, black holes, apart from people unnecessarily worried about creating black holes when the LHC was switched on, you are really not going to get any of them on Earth. I did try to find a pet black hole once. It turns out that they don't sell them if you are looking for them, you know, because it's a sign that you're quite crazy already. So you really can't do these scales of studies on Earth. And to actually gain access to these kind of fields, to actually be able to study these kind of objects, fortunately, the universe actually creates them for us already. And as astronomers, we can actually study them. But here is one very important question that I would ask as a follow-up. You know, how is this different from astrology?
Astrology.
in astrology, they predict the future by seeing the positions of the planets and the stars. So
Okay.
that is different thing.
It's not actually a science, right? I mean, astrology is. Mhm. It's not
Correct.
based
What
on
do you mean by it is not a science?
like it's not based on quantitative facts or theorems.
Correct. So the main thing that we are looking for is something called evidence-driven science. Okay. So anyone knows who this chap is?
Galileo.
Yep, that's a good guess. This is Galileo. And there are actually three key things that you can notice in this picture. One of them is Galileo. What is Galileo doing?
Telescope and viewing the universe.
Okay, so he has a telescope here.
Paper.
He has some kind of a paper in which he notes down stuff or draws stuff.
And of course, we have Galileo. The hardest part of this course, by the way, is going to be understanding my handwriting. Okay, so good luck with that. No one can help you there. The important point is that he is observing. Okay, and these broadly tell you the three areas of astronomy and astrophysics. Okay, what we have here, this is observations. which are made using instruments. And then, of course, you have theory. Okay. See, I'm doing bad spelling as well. Okay, so what is the difference between a crackpot theory and a good theory? Okay, I'm sure you'll have heard of all these kind of
Sir,
weird theories.
a good theory applies to whole universe. Like a theory applying on the earth, then it will also apply outer of the earth and everything and in every situation. But
So it stands up to experiment. So there are a
yes,
lot of differences. A good theory has to be internally consistent. It should not involve, mystical powers, turtles on top of turtles, or anything like that. It should also not end up, deriving from movies, for example, and doing weird stuff. It should be a framework that can actually make. So it has to first be able to explain what is observed, and it has to be able to make predictions which can either be verified or falsified with further observations. Okay, these are the two key components of a good theory. You have to have predictive power, and you have to be able to explain observations. Okay, and so if you think of astronomers, well, these are the three broad categories under which you will find astronomers. If you look at theory, for example, then you have people like Professor J.N. Narlikar and, of course, Stephen Hawking and Einstein and so on. If you look at observations, that is what you primarily think of when you think of astronomy. Someone going to a telescope and observing. These days, of course, we don't observe with only optical telescopes anymore. We have space telescopes, we have X-ray and gamma ray telescopes, radio telescopes, all sorts of high-edge instruments. And then this third category, which is unfortunately often forgotten, is people who actually have to build these instruments. I mean, those instruments don't suddenly appear by themselves. Somebody has to go and make them. A great example of this from the Indian context is Professor Govind Swarup, the person who set up the giant, or the person who led, he didn't set it up alone. The person who led the setup of the giant meter wave radio telescope, or the GMRT. Another person is Professor P.C. Agarwal, who was the main power figure behind AstroSat. Okay, so doing all of this, we actually have to do experiments. Okay, so we have a theory which then makes predictions. Then we have to do experiments. And then we have to verify the theory and update it if necessary. And this is one area which kind of becomes a problem in astronomy. Okay, if I want to study, let's say, a chemical reaction in a lab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my reagents in a test tube, mix them, and I'm actually going to observe and see what happens, and then probably take measurements, do further tests to see what kind of compound was formed, maybe measure its energetics and so on. If I want to study gravitational waves and the collisions of two black holes, I can't quite set up two black holes and say go. Okay, or if I want to study how a galaxy is evolving, I can't really just go sit next to the galaxy for about 10 billion years. There are times when it can feel like 10 billion years have passed, but in real time, that is not really feasible. So we are very much experiment driven science, but our experiments come in a very different flavor, which is that we have to observe whatever the universe is doing. We don't actually have a control over our experiment. Okay, so going back to the chemistry example, it is as if, let's say in your first year chemistry course, you were told to figure out the details of a reaction by standing in the next building, and you can only see someone doing the experiment. You can't actually communicate with them. So in that sense, we are a physical science where we are very much data driven. We are very much evidence driven. Of course, everything is derived from observations. Uh, Great theories, of course, matter, but without observations, they have very limited value. For example, Einstein did not get a Nobel Prize for the general theory of relativity because it had not been verified by the time. So he got a Nobel Prize for Brownian motion. So and those.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, like I want to ask, like, do we observe always like telescopes? Like, if we want to observe the inner core of the sun, then we can detect the neutrinos come from the sun.
Correct. Correct.
Like we can use neutrino also to understand the
That is
properties.
a very good point. So let's talk about how observations can be done. So suppose we are looking at observations as a whole. So I will come to that. Let me finish this first point quickly and then I'll come to your question. So yes, we are very much evidence driven, and evidence, we are at the mercy of the universe to do things, and we can only sit, wait and watch and observe them from one side. We can't even go around, we can't rewind it, forward it, anything. So what kind of tools do we use to gather that evidence? So the buzzword these days is what is called multi-messenger astronomy. Multi-messenger astronomy. Okay, so what are the different channels through which the universe gives us information? The most important channel, of course, is light. And that includes optical. But as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it is also X-ray, gamma ray, radio, UV, infrared. But these are all forms of electromagnetic radiation. So that's the first messenger that we have. The newer ones which have become available, this is not very new, but particles. And this can either be neutrinos coming from space, or it can be cosmic rays. Right, so this is a very different form of information that the universe is sending towards us. And then the third type, which has opened up very, very recently, of course, is gravitational waves. Okay, so with recent Nobel Prize being given, does anyone remember when gravitational waves got the Nobel Prize?
They were discovered in 15, right? 2015.
Correct. The first signal was discovered on the 14th of September 2015, and the Nobel Prize followed soon enough. When I say multi-messenger, though, a very interesting discovery, which, for example, our group studied very extensively, happened in 2017, an event called GW 170817. So 17th of August 2017, there was a merger of two neutron stars, and that was accompanied with a bright flash in electromagnetic radiation. So each of these messengers are like different senses. So just as the human body has different senses like vision and taste and smell and touch and so on, these are the different senses that we have in order to probe the universe. And it is by using these that we have managed to put together a remarkably good picture of what the universe is all about. We know how fast the universe is expanding. We know that it is expanding. We know that it is accelerating. We know how long ago it was born. We know when the sun was born and how the solar system was formed. There are, of course, open questions, but those open questions are all about details at this point, and this is a never-ending rabbit hole as such. That when you see one question, when you answer one question, there are more questions that will open up because now you want to understand it better and better and better. Okay, so speaking of this, now the goal of this course is not to actually do just theory. So for example, when we noted down the things that would be studied under astronomy, we actually had this interesting category here about white holes and wormholes. Okay. Yeah, it is very interesting, of course, to talk about and think about these objects. But I've worked with a few hundred professional astronomers, and none of them exactly zero of them actually work on, say, wormholes. So these are very, very interesting theoretical constructs, but we have absolutely zero observational evidence about them at this point. And unfortunately, there are no robust, accessible predictions about how we would actually be able to observe them. So yeah, they might exist, sure, but they are not of interest to me right now because they are not within our grasp as of right now. So in this course, what we want to do is we want to take up this evidence-driven idea, and what we will be doing throughout is that we will learn how to gather this evidence. Okay, and there are several steps. Oops. Okay, we will restrict ourselves to optical astronomy. Whether in the rest of the lecture I will use astronomy and astrophysics kind of interchangeably, or actually you can say in the rest of the course itself. Okay, so how to gather the evidence? So solving a problem actually begins with first identifying a problem. So asking the right question, what is it that I want to study? Then you have this large set of questions which are very interesting, and then you try to identify which of those questions are actually of interest to you. So there's a large set of questions that are interesting to, say, all of humanity, a subset of them which are interesting to you, a smaller subset of those which can actually be tackled with the resources that you have at your disposal. For example, if I want to study a certain object, then I must have a telescope which is capable enough of actually imaging that object. Or I must be in a season where that object is actually visible. As you know, the night sky actually is different in every season. We will study why later in the course, and you'll be able to derive these kind of things. But identifying the right question is the first step here. Okay, identify the question, then you design an experiment to answer that question. Then, of course, you conduct the experiment. Once you have conducted the experiment, you have to reduce and analyze data. Okay, so broadly speaking, data reduction means you get, say, images from a telescope, you take those images and you convert them into a table of numbers. Okay, so roughly speaking, that is what would be data reduction. Data analysis is now doing something with that table, interpreting it and so on. And then you finally interpret your results. Okay, and see if you have solved the question. Okay, spoiler alert, the answer to the last step is usually no, you have not. You have managed to chip away at a small part of the question, probably a smaller part than you intended to chip away. Okay, so it's very rare that there's a question where a simple single observation can quickly solve it for you. Okay, so I'm going to actually step you through a few examples of how we have actually been attacking some problems within our group. Okay, so let me start with something called supernovae. Okay, have you heard of how many of you know what supernovae are? Anyone?
Death of a star.
Death of a star. Okay, that's quite, yeah. So I have a few hands up. Pawan or Himansh?
Yeah, so sir, when the time passes, the stars go in the supernova phase, and after that they burst out. So it is the death of star, the last time.
Okay, so it's the death of a star. Okay, now not all stars actually die as supernovae. A sun-like star, for example, will actually die a very quiet and wimpy death, and it will become something called a white dwarf. These stellar evolution phases are something we will study later in the course, but this is something which happens for massive stars. Okay, so roughly stars greater than about 8 times the mass of the sun. So this is a symbol that is used for denoting the sun. Okay, it is denoted by a circle with a dot at the center. So stars heavier than about 8 times the mass of the sun actually end their lives exploding as a supernova. Now, studying a star based on a supernova explosion is kind of like a detective story. And why is that? Because you always reach the scene of the crime after the crime has happened. You can't possibly be sitting and watching watching every single star in detail. There are about 10 raised to 11 stars in the Milky Way, and there are about 10 raised to 11 galaxies in the universe. You have about 10 raised to 22 stars. Go figure. You really just can't. So now you have this massive stellar explosion, and what happens is, as a result, the star becomes much, much, much brighter. A single supernova can outshine an entire galaxy, but you want to observe that, and on the basis of that, you want to put together a picture of what really happened. So since I said we are going to focus on optical astronomy, let me give you an example of how that can be done. Okay, so here's an object that we studied using the Growth India telescope. This is the telescope you saw on the first slide in the nice time lapse. By the way, I notice Utkarsh has his hand up. Utkarsh, do you have a question?
No,
Okay,
sir. It turned on. I
okay,
don't know.
okay, no problem.
Technically.
So this supernova, as the name suggests, was a supernova from the year 2018. HNA actually is just astronomers' way of doing nomenclature. This is a scheme which has been adopted globally only recently. The first explosive transient source we see in the year 2021, for example, was called AT. So I'm going to annotate on this. So astronomical transient 2021A, and then we will go to 21Z, then we'll start with 21AA, AB, and so on. ऐसे करते करते finally this is HNA in the year 2018. Okay, so we studied this with the Growth India telescope and a bunch of other telescopes, because data from just one telescope is not going to solve the problem for us. So what we have here is there is someone who's unmuted and I can hear some background. Could you mute, please? So I think that let me mute this person. Thanks. So what we have here in many different colors and many different graphs here is, first is you can see how long the observations actually happened. Okay, so we started observing right here. So this is 0, date of the explosion. We started observing in less than a week after the explosion. And then it took close to about 90 days or so, 3 months before the supernova actually reached its peak brightness. And going forward from there, we continued observations all the way till here. Okay, that's about 240 days or about 8 months of observations. And you can see that there's a later set of observations that was also obtained. These observations are actually taken in different color filters. So some of you may know that, for instance, the screens that you are watching me on right now, they have pixels, and those pixels consist of red, green, and blue colors. The way you get those colors is depending on the technology in your pixels, you could have LEDs emitting that light, or in slightly older variants, you have a white light source, and you actually have colored glass in front of it, which is either transmitting only red, blue, or green light. So similarly, these are different filters which are used here. You can see the names of those filters at the top. We have filters called UBVRI, followed by JHK. So R is red, V is visible, U is ultraviolet, JHK are infrared bands. So roughly around 1.2 to 2.5 microns. And then at the right here, we have ultraviolet observations and so on. So we observed this with many different telescopes. And you can see some interesting features here. For example, the supernova, if you look at this lower right plot, then the supernova became brighter, then fell, and then you see this power law kind of decay. So this last phase here is when the supernova was actually being powered by radioactive decay of nickel. And the rate of decline here very nicely matches the half-life of nickel. Parth has a question. Go ahead, Parth.
Sorry, sir. No, like filtering out what colors are emitted at what magnitudes from a supernova, does this give you like more information on what elements are produced within the explosion?
Correct. So the reason why we want to study this, that's a very good question. Why do we want to study this in different bands? These are called bands or filters. So the what happens is that depending on what emission process is going on, a day-to-day example is that if your eyes also have, the reason why RGB became standard is your eyes have cones and rods, and they are also sensitive to roughly red, green, and blue regions of light. So if I show you a very hot object, then you know there's red hot, yellow hot, and then white hot, and so on. And that, of course, you have heard of black body radiation, I'm sure, where as you heat an object, it emits at shorter and shorter wavelengths. So just by looking at the object, what your brain is really doing is comparing the relative brightness in these three bands, which your cones are sensitive to. And on the basis of those comparisons, it is deciding how hot the object is. Similarly, here, based on the colors of the supernova, we can actually figure out a lot about its properties. Infrared, so UV light, for example, is very easily blocked or scattered by dust. And on the other hand, infrared light, the dust then gets hot and re-emits in infrared. So all of these are details which we learn from that. And in this particular case, there were also curious features that we saw here. You see that this is falling sharply in UV, then rising, and then it is following the shape like the optical light curve. So what seems to have happened here is that a supernova explosion is a really crazy phenomenon. Okay, you have this massive star 10-20 times the mass of the sun. The core just explodes. Okay, what happens, we will study the details there, but the core explodes and it sends a shock wave through the through the star. So the outer layers of the star under gravity would still have taken some time to fall in, and the shock wave just plows through everything. And when the shock actually breaks out of the surface, it creates a flash of radiation, and that's the flash. It's called a shock breakout, and that's what we have seen here. Coming back to that question, the brightness in different bands does not fully tell us the spectral story. So we actually do go and take spectra. I see that there's a large lag here. Let me see. Yes, here we are. So just one spectrum, of course, would not have been enough. So here is a series of spectra starting from about 12 days after the explosion and going down all the way to 250 days after the explosion. And you can see there are a lot of crazy features here in the spectra at short wavelengths first, and those over time they disappear. And then there is a different family of features here which was not there initially. Then these features evolved and then they changed in their shape and so on. And each of these lines that you see actually means something. So here is one example. There is a
Sir,
large lag. Yes.
technically, doesn't the supernova core implode?
The supernova starts with the collapse of a core, but then it is an explosion. So we'll get into the details of supernovae later in the course. Okay. So coming back to Parth's previous question, here is a list of all the elements that were present. I'm not sure you would be able to read all of them, but marked in red are lines of barium. Then over here you see lines of calcium. This is oxygen. Scandium is seen here. You see iron, a lot of iron features at these places. And then in blue you have hydrogen. This here is H alpha, which shows quite a curious asymmetric shape in the line profile. And each of these things tells us something. Okay. So spectra, Growth India telescope is actually not capable of taking spectra. This was a design choice. The abilities of the telescope are best utilized by doing photometry or just measurements of brightness. So that is what we do with that telescope. Okay, so let's look at another. Supernovae are just one thing, let's look at another class of object. These are called blazars. Whoops. I went on too quickly. So let me switch back to, where should I go? Here. Okay. Yes. So blazars are these cores of extremely active galaxies. So if you have a large galaxy, I'm going to have to try switching my screen again because the lag is more than ever. Give me just a moment. I am going to have to stop sharing and share it again. Wow, we are really stuck here. So maybe I'll just talk while this is getting figured out. So what happens is that we have found that almost every galaxy has a very large black hole at the center. Okay, these are called supermassive black holes, and these black holes are of masses millions to billions of times the mass of our sun. Okay, hence the name supermassive. So give me one moment. Okay, I think I will be able to rejoin this meeting now. Microsoft has decided that it doesn't really want me sharing my screen and showing all of this. Let me try this again. No, absolutely not. It tells me that there is a meeting underway. So what I'm doing is I'm actually showing you slides from a different device here, because that is what allows me to nicely write and let you see that what I'm writing there. Okay, there are always tech issues and we should always be willing to find our ways around them. So while Teams realizes that I really am trying to join the same meeting again, I'm going to talk to you about blazars from right here. So blazars are these objects when you have this extremely massive black hole that is actually gobbling up stuff like crazy from its environment. Okay, so what do I mean? So let me show you an artist's image over here and try to explain with that. Wow, now sharing panel is gone completely. We are back. Well, let's hope that this doesn't end up becoming the norm where you're all waiting patiently or impatiently while I'm figuring out how to share this. Yes, so here is an artist's rendering of what is going on. So you have this active galactic nucleus. What is happening is that the black hole is actually trying to suck in matter. And as that is happening, some of the because it is falling in under the strong gravitational pull, it starts moving at very high velocities. And then a fraction of that matter actually gets launched in these very massive jets, which you can see here being shot out in two perpendicular directions. And there is this huge torus of dust and gas that is present around it. What is not shown in this rendering is the galaxy itself and where the galaxy would be present. So what we can have as a result of this is different people looking at this object from different directions will actually see a very different story. These jets that you see here are relativistic. So you get Doppler boosting and they are extremely bright. So if you happen to be along one of these jets, then you will see that the source is really bright. And which means that you can see it from almost all the way across the universe. On the other hand, if you're looking at it from here, you will see it as a different class of galaxies, what are called Seyfert galaxies. And then there are radio loud galaxies, there are radio quiet galaxies, there are flat spectrum radio quiet. So there's a full classification zoo of these active galactic nuclei. And that's a very nice lesson in itself about how knowledge progresses. So people saw these different kinds of galaxies. And of course, we couldn't actually obtain such high resolution images of them. This is an artist concept, as you can see in the title itself. And the reason why this is an artist's image or an artist rendering is that you actually cannot, until very recently, you had not been able to see the black hole at the center of any of these galaxies. I'm sure you have heard about the black hole image taken by the Event Horizon Telescope. But these objects are so far away that the angular sizes of this on the sky are very, very small. And because of those small angular sizes, we actually have to indirectly infer properties of these sources. So one of the most famous blazars is an object called BL Lac, which is an object in the or BL Lacertae in the constellation of Lacerta. We actually observed this object with our telescope, and over time, what we saw is that the object was varying quite a bit in its intensity. So what is plotted here on the y-axis is brightness, and on the x-axis is time in days. So you can see that we have a span of observations here. Then there's a big gap and another span of observations. Any guess why we stopped observing in between for such a long time?
Like maybe if it's observed with a satellite, then the satellite got behind the Earth or something.
This is observed with the Growth India telescope. So yes, that was a good guess, good start. So this is observed with the Growth India telescope, which is this telescope in Ladakh, Hanle. Can I go to a telescope right now and observe a source?
Maybe because season has changed.
There is
Hold on. So the x-axis, I'm not sure if all of you can see this clearly. So let me zoom this. Okay, the x-axis, the font might still not be clear, unfortunately. X-axis here is time in days. Okay, so we have 5.2, 5.4, all the way. This is 6.2, and the last tick that you see is 6.4 days. All right. So we have time in days on one axis. So I was asking right now, is the sun up?
I mean, in India, yes.
Yeah, this is Growth India telescope in Ladakh, which is still thankfully very much in India, right? So can I observe this object today, right now?
Also, the sun was up. Is that what we're trying to say?
Yeah.
Because the
5.4
5.4 and
what you see is that, so forget why the days are in decimals. Again, something we'll cover later. But there are three conditions that have to be matched. Okay, when if you want to observe an object. The first is that it has to be nighttime. Second is that the object actually has to be above the horizon. And third is that the weather and instrument have to cooperate with you. Okay, so I cannot start observing until the sky gets dark. The sky does not get dark immediately at sunset. It's bright for an hour or two after sunset, depending on the season and where, what latitude you are at. Okay, after that, the object might not be visible for a very long time. For example, some of you may have actually seen the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that happened over a month ago. And so Jupiter and Saturn were very high up in the sky at say 4 p.m. or 4:20 p.m. like right now, but they were not observable because the sky was too bright because the sun was up. So you could start seeing them after sunset, but then you would have to stop observing in 1 or 2 hours again. And that is because those objects also set with the sun, right? So what that means is observations can start at what is called evening twilight. They have to stop at what is called morning twilight. But even within that time, the objects might not actually be visible continuously. Okay, so we took observations on the first day. This gap here is a combination of the source being below the horizon or the sun being above the horizon. And then we took observations on another day. Okay, and you can see that there are two things plotted here. The blue curves, the blue dots at the bottom are just some star that happens to be close to BL-lac for reference. And you can see that its brightness is pretty much constant. But BL-lac itself on the first night is showing some slow variation, maybe some flaring. On the second night, there is this kind of a bump that you see on the right end of the light curve. And these are quite curious phenomena if you think of it. This is an object which has a million or a billion times solar mass black hole, and its brightness is just fluctuating on timescales of hours. So what does it mean? In this particular case, we don't know yet. And just optical data is not enough. So that brings us into the regime of what is called multi-wavelength astronomy. So we have a colleague who's a team at IIT Indore, for instance, and they are actually working on analyzing data for this object from other telescopes as well. So this is data from places like, let's say, X-ray telescopes and radio telescopes and so on. And we will see if in those bands also we got the same kind of bumps and wiggles as we did in this particular light curve in the optical band. And based on those variations, we will try to interpret the physics of what it is that was happening in the source. Okay, let me now show you two more examples and then we'll come to other boring core stuff. So here is...
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know how exactly to ask this question. It can be a bit vague. So
sure.
Suppose like you want to observe this blazar. So like the blazar, I mean, doesn't send you an invitation as to, okay, I'm here, look at me. So how do you know that, okay, where to like look for this blazar, or the blazar is there? As in like to the human eye, everything seems like just point sources like stars.
Excellent question. And this is a good lead into this particular slide. Okay, so keep your eye on the there is one interesting source in this image, right? And it's always very easy to identify this source. It always comes with a green circle around it. This is a time lapse of images taken with the Growth India telescope on 10th of October just last year. So just about 2-3 months ago. And you can see that there is a source in the center, which is actually fading over time. So this particular thing is what is called the afterglow of a gamma ray burst. Okay, so gamma ray bursts are birth of a black hole. They come in two types. This particular one was most likely associated with a supernova. And the way we know where to point is actually quite complicated. So there are space-based instruments which detect these explosions in gamma rays. So they see a sudden flash in gamma rays. I could have made some illustrations if technology actually, ironically, we are at Indian Institute of Technology, but apparently I'm not as tech savvy as I would like to be. So yeah, I can't connect to my tablet right now, so I can't illustrate this, but you have you're measuring some counts in X-rays and gamma rays as a function of time. Suddenly you see a big spike. And the spike then is telling you that some kind of explosion happened somewhere. And based on the data that these satellites receive, they tell you roughly where that explosion happened on the sky. Okay, one such satellite which can do this to a limited extent is this one. So this is AstroSat. And one of the instruments here, this particular one, well, this is a model of AstroSat to be technically correct. The instrument there is called cadmium zinc telluride imager, and we've just detected, I think, over 400
sir, we are
of
still
such
on
bursts. My video is also on, right? I actually held it up. You can see my video thumbnail at the bottom, I'm sure. Anyway, so AstroSat is an Indian space telescope, and AstroSat can detect bursts like these. And then these space telescopes tell us roughly where in the sky that source is. Sometimes it can be localized very well so that you can see it easily with a normal telescope. Sometimes you need to go and take wide field telescopes and point them to a general part of the sky, search over a large area, and then you will find a new source. And in this particular case, the source we are looking for is something which was not there the night before. Of course, you can't continuously image the entire sky at high sensitivity. So you have to look, and then many groups actually have started collaborating on these fronts. So you have to obtain archival images, look if any source was there, and then if there is a new source, then that is a plausible source that you are looking for, something that was created along with the gamma ray burst, and then it was slowly fading with time. As for BL-LAC, how do we know it's a blazar? We know because people have been looking for curious objects all over the sky for a long time. How did we know that it was time to observe that particular blazar and it was going to start showing variability? Well, some people who are interested in studying the physics of blazars actually kept monitoring the object as a function of time, and they realized that it has become active. So they issued what are called ATELs, astronomers telegrams, saying, alerting everyone else, saying, hey, look, this object has become active. Let's go and study it in great detail. Okay, remember, we are limited by what the universe throws at us. Okay, so we are a very evidence driven field, experimental field, but we have no control on the experiment itself. So if we want to understand what blazars do, what happens when material is actually falling into these supermassive black holes, then we have to wait for those supermassive black holes to do something funny, so that while we are analyzing that unexpected behavior, we will get more insights into the physics of whatever was going on there. This animation that you just saw is not what really gives us the scientific results, by the way. And I've been talking about all of these observations and inferences and so on. The purpose of this slide, and this is a slide actually made by Harsh, your TA. And the purpose of this slide is just to tell you that there's a lot that actually goes in behind the scenes in order to make an animation like this possible, right? And it's not just about the animation, it's actually about getting that data, then being able to extract photometric values from that data and then interpreting what is going on there. Okay, so there's a lot of behind the scenes activity that that you should keep in mind. Let's come to the last topic that I'll talk of before going to course details. So asteroids, of course, we study asteroids here as well. So solar system objects here is in this image. Now stars are black instead of white, but again, green circle shows you where to look. And there's an asteroid called Gault, and you can see that it is streaking across the star field. You can see that it is actually moving quite fast. This is of course not real time, but you can see time in minutes that is mentioned at the top. Top left here is UTC, and here is Indian Standard Time. Data taken just over 3 months ago. Okay, and we were studying this particular asteroid because it is in this strange category of asteroids where it is what is called episodically active. So if you look at the colloquial definition, asteroids are rocks, and then comets are these icy chunks which have large tails. Gault is somewhere in between. It occasionally can sprout a tail. It shows signs of activity, but most other times it actually looks very much like a regular rock. So we were studying this, and in this particular case, the motion, although it is happening here on timescales of minutes, in individual images, you can see that the asteroid is still looking more or less like a point source. What if though the asteroid were moving faster? And it depends on how far away the object is and what part of the sky it is. Again, these are calculations which we'll learn sometime later in the course. So here's an example of another asteroid. This is 2020 UA1. These are actually confirmation images, a series of images obtained with the Growth India telescope. Again, there is time at the top left and top right, but now you can see that we have shown hours, minutes, and seconds. And these streaks that you are seeing are actually background stars. So what we are doing is, so here's something that we don't usually think of. Okay, the Earth rotates quite fast. If you are sitting on the equator, you are moving at about half a kilometer per second, and the entire sky 360 degrees has to go around within 24 hours. So we are moving at about 15 degrees per hour. And if you look at these asteroids like this, then the motion would actually smear out the light into a faint streak that we would not see. So whenever we are taking data with a telescope, the telescope actually tracks along the known motion of the stars. But in this particular case, the asteroid moving at a separate apparent angular speed means that we can't track the stars. We have to track the satellite asteroid instead. and then the stars themselves appear as streaks. Okay, so finally we are in about the last 25 minutes of today's lecture. So let me tell you what the course content and overall layout is going to be like. Roughly, there are four broad components. One is stars and the solar system. So we'll learn about stellar classification, life cycle of stars, and so on. And then we'll also look at the solar system, planets and orbits, maybe look a bit more into asteroids and so on. Then there is a part that has to do with observations and analysis, and this is the course project component, and this is really at the heart of the course. Okay, so what you have to get an experience of here is not something that you would see in, say, a Nat Geo or Discovery documentary. Okay, looking at those documentaries and extrapolating that to what astronomers do is like looking at a Karan Johar movie and using that to get your idea of college life. So if you thought that life in IIT was going to be like any of these college flicks, then you would have been disappointed. The same might happen in astronomy and astrophysics. But on the other hand, life at IIT is quite interesting. I'm quite sure a lot of you are keen to return to normalcy and come back to campus. Similarly, a lot of interesting things do happen in astronomy and astrophysics as well. And this chunk here, which is centered on your projects, is meant to give you full experience of that. So you have to plan what kind of objects you want to observe. Of course, we'll help you. You have to see if those objects are actually accessible by the Growth India telescope, whether meaningful results can be obtained with the time available. Then you have to process the data, reduce it, analyze it, and then write up reports and presentations and everything. Then the third chunk is the tools of astronomy and astrophysics. So we'll discuss telescopes and detectors and what is the sensitivity, how far away can a telescope see, is magnification really that important, coordinate systems in the sky, how to know when an object is going to be visible where, and so on. And then the last part, which I'm calling the big picture, is to give you an overview of everything else in astronomy. So we will have one lecture each on some special topics, cosmology, high energy astrophysics, radio astronomy astrophysics, gravitational waves, exoplanets. I'll take suggestions from you as well, and we'll see, we will decide what lectures can be made based on a combination of demand and supply. We need to have good speakers available to talk about whatever it is that you are interested in hearing. Projects are really at the heart of this course. So we have, of course, a very large group this time. As of right now, there are 96 students who have signed up. And we know these numbers, of course, change later. Typically about 30% drop out in over the next couple of weeks, but that's still a lot of you here. Projects are something which you will be doing astro projects for the first time, very likely. And that is why we don't want you doing them alone. Projects will be done in groups of 3 to 5 students. You pick your groups. I usually encourage that you go for a broad mix. So don't team up with just your wingies or your department batchmates and so on. You get to learn a lot more if your group has people with varying backgrounds. So I would still recommend, I'm not going to enforce it, but I would strongly recommend that try to make project groups where you have a mix of master's students with bachelor students and people from different departments and so on. So each group, so the largest student group signed up here, of course, are MSc Physics students and EP BTech students. So in each group, I would say try to have one person from BTech EP, one person from MSc Physics, and one person from all the other departments that we have. If it's possible, great. If it's not possible, okay. I mean, these are not usual circumstances, so you have the leeway to pick your team. Then we come to the course grading. So your projects are actually the most significant component. They'll carry 40% of the course grade, and parts of these will actually be given to the team. Parts of these will be individual. And you have to go through everything. So if I actually want to get data from a telescope, we start with writing an observing proposal. So we have to make a science case saying, if we were talking of, say, gamma ray bursts. So gamma ray bursts are interesting because XYZ, and I have to make a scientific case And then I have to say what are the interesting problems in gamma ray bursts, what is it that I would like to study and understand. Then I have to say how would the Growth India telescope actually help me understand any of those questions. So you propose for an observing time on the basis of that. Then you go get your data. We will teach you data analysis. We will, of course, take a lot of steps to simplify it. So you don't have to know as much as, say, the PhD students here have to know about the data. And then after that, you will make presentations as a group, and we will have short viva for individuals at the end of it to make sure you have really understood everything. Then there will be 2 take-home open book assignments that will be given, one before, one after midsem. These will be 10 marks each, and then midsem and endsem are just 20 marks each. Okay, I know nobody likes all this remote proctoring and so on, so we have reduced the weightage to that. We right now really have no idea of how things are changing in the outside world with time. So all of this is subject to various changed circumstances, right? In last year's course, I had announced a very nice timeline, and then of course, just after midsem, everyone went home. So I'm adding a caveat at the bottom. So that's it. That's what I wanted to talk about. So we have about 20 minutes left, and you'll notice that I actually hurried through the last few slides because I wanted to have some time free at the end. I'm sure there are people who have questions about the course and about projects and about anything else, or about Astro as a whole. Yes, please say your name first.
Sir, this is Himansh.
Hi, Himansh. Yes.
Sir, a physics question. So, like in the asteroid images that you showed, the first image, in the first image, the reference frame was fixed at stars, background stars, and in the second image, the reference frame was fixed at the object, the asteroid itself. So why we are using 2 different reference frames for both cases?
So, okay, I got a chance to join again from here. So let me explain this better with using a whiteboard now. Give me a moment, okay? So what is happening is that, okay, suppose I took a telescope. Let's say the Growth India telescope is what is called a wide field telescope. All right, give me just a moment. Okay, still not working. So imagine that I have a telescope which is pointing straight up. All right. And in this telescope now, what is going to happen? It randomly decides to let me join or not. So let me figure that out before the next lecture. So the sky, as I said, is moving at about 15 degrees per hour. The field of view of a typical telescope is about 0.1 degrees. So how long would it take for that thing to zip past through the telescope? Can someone calculate that?
0.1 by 15 hours. Just 1 by 150 hours.
So 1 by 15th of an hour is 4 minutes. So this is going to take about 0.4 minutes, right? So things move very, very fast. We don't quite realize it because we are looking at a large swath of the sky at any point of time. But if you actually were looking in a small part of the sky, things move very fast. Now, how do you decide what rate you want to track? Well, you want to see the stars. You want to image the star and get a high quality image. So you calculate how fast the star is going to move across the sky. And then you have your telescope move along with that. Okay. Now, along with the star, if there was an asteroid which is moving with respect to the stars, then what is going to happen is I'm going to get blurred images. Just as if you are trying to photograph something and your hand moves as you are taking the image, you are going to get a blurred streak. If your focus was really to study the stars, then that's fine. Asteroid moving across the front is an annoyance. It's as if you're photographing a sunset and some fly flew through in between. You really don't care. But on the other hand, if you're a zoologist studying that fly, then you really don't care about the sunset that's happening in the background. You want to track the fly. So that is what we will do. If you are interested in studying the stars, you will track the stars. If you are interested in studying the asteroid, you will track the asteroid. Now that brings us to the Gault animation which I showed, where we were studying the asteroid, but we were still tracking the stars. And the reason for that is that the asteroid was moving slowly enough in that particular case that the motion of the asteroid in a single image was actually negligible. For instance, if you look at the stars themselves, they are all moving. The sun is orbiting around the center of our galaxy. Earth itself is moving around the sun. All stars have their own random motions. These are called proper motions. But we don't really notice that in the sky, right? Because those motions in terms of angular speeds are very, very, very slow. Asteroids can move faster, but not all of them will necessarily move as fast. So in the case of those observations of Gault, we decided to track with the stars. That makes image processing and other work a bit easier because most of our processing software and pipelines are designed to work with images where you see stars as point sources. And the asteroid was moving slowly enough that we could still study it as if it was a point source. We just had to figure out where it was in every image.
Okay, thank you, sir.
More questions?
Hello, sir. This is Prasoon.
Hi. Yes.
Sir, I have a doubt that how are we sure that the gamma radiation is coming from a blazar or it's not coming from something nearby? Like, for example, I am measuring the radiation and drawing the graph, but how am I sure that it's not coming from a nearby star or something else going around?
That's a very good question. Measuring distance in astronomy is actually very, very difficult. Okay, if I want to locate an object in space, I need 3 coordinates. We usually think in terms of a Cartesian system x, y, z. In astronomy, we always use a angular coordinate system, r, theta, phi. Okay, so it is very easy to give you the angular coordinates. I can say, yeah, object is there in the sky. It's very difficult, it turns out, to figure out how far away it is. So for sources like gamma ray bursts or blazars before that, or a current area of study is something called fast radio bursts. There's always a question about how can we figure out if this is something, say, it is clearly, so it is quite easy to dismiss something whether it is, say, in low Earth orbit or on Earth or something like that. You have a space telescope or multiple telescopes on the ground, and anything that is nearby will show you different parallaxes and so on. So those are easy to dismiss. But something that is, say, distant within the solar system or something within our galaxy or something at truly cosmological distances, it's very difficult to separate between those. So the way we know blazars are this far away, first is isotropy. Okay, so we know that a strong principle in our analysis is that we are not special. Okay, so put more formally, we believe that the universe is isotropic and homogeneous, which means that if you have a very bright source spread uniformly throughout the universe, no matter which direction you see, you will see a similar number of those sources. On the other hand, the Milky Way itself is a flattish galaxy. So if I have sources which are only in the Milky Way, then I will see them more in a particular direction. For example, the first movie that you saw today showed a band of stars in the Milky Way, and that is because you are in the plane of the Milky Way itself. So the stars just appear in a ring around you. So if something is present in the Milky Way, then it is going to, the distribution on the sky is going to follow the Milky Way. If something is in the solar system, there's a good chance that it will follow along the orbit of the planets, the region called the ecliptic, which is where all the zodiac signs are. If you want to imagine where it is on the sky, it's also the path that the moon and the planets take along the sky. On the other hand, if it is cosmological and spread uniformly, then you'll see them in equal numbers in all directions. So that was the first hint about this particular class of sources. And then later we understood them. So the name for some of these things given earlier was actually quasars, which stood for quasi-stellar sources. So these were identified as sources which were star-like, but the spectra did not look like stars at all. And then it took a lot of analysis and building up with small conjectures on top of each other, evidenced, of course, and proven with theories. And theories that made predictions that were verified, and moving on, that we understood that these are actually the galaxies like the image that I showed you. And these galaxies then we can then start obtaining spectra for some of these. Some of them showed redshift, some of them did not. In other cases, we saw, we knew they happened to be behind other objects which we knew were far away. And that is how we got evidence about distances to certain lasers. So it was a long, slow building up process which allowed us to conclude that blazars are really far away.
Hi, sir. There's a question in the chat. So
Question in the chat. Okay, let me see. There is a slot clash for second year EP students. Yes, this is something I've heard about. Now, unfortunately, playing with slots is poking a hornet's nest. Okay, if I move this to say one of the late night slots or something like that, well, one problem is that people apparently like to sleep and stuff. But since institute has slots, let's assume that those are fair game. But there will be other courses that are already running in those slots, and then if I fix it for student A, then student B has a slot clash, and then I move it for student B, then now C has a slot clash, and it's a game that never ends. Second year EP students is, and sometimes even first year MSc students, these are queries we get every year, and we have discussed them in the department, and you do have other opportunities to take this course. Second year EP students can take it in third year, fourth year, MSc students can take it in second year. So unfortunately, I cannot adjust it from that slot clash. That said, all these lectures will be recorded and they will be put online. I'll link them from Moodle, and if you people want to have Moodle access, I'm happy to give it. So you can still get to pseudo attend the course and get the learning part of it, but unfortunately we cannot move the slot clash. And I see there are a bunch of thumbs up in support of that, but I'm sorry, as much optimization of the calendar as possible to avoid slot clashes was already done by the department calendar coordinator, timetable coordinator, when the timetable was set up.
Sir, Utkarsh here.
Yeah. Yes, Utkarsh.
Can this course be taken as an institute elective course?
Yes, this can be taken as an institute elective. People have taken it in the past. For the department students, I think this is something you should verify. I don't think you can take it as a department elective. So there is, if you are a physics student, either a EP or a MSc physics student, EP student, then there is a separate clause which I don't remember right now. So this won't count as a physics elective for you. But for students from all other departments, yeah, you can take it as a institute elective. Essentially, anything that the Acad office allows you to do, I am fine with. Okay, my expectation from people taking the course is to attend lectures, but I don't enforce it. If you don't want to attend, I'm never going to take attendance. So it's completely up to you. The second expectation is that you have to take the project very seriously. Okay, remember this is an elective. This is not a course you are forced to do. So don't show up if you are not really interested in the stuff. So take the project seriously. Growth India telescope, by the way. So IIT Bombay operates this telescope. Okay, IIT Bombay and II have 50-50 share in this telescope. I don't know when you were joining IIT if you knew that IIT Bombay actually has a telescope anywhere. And it is the second most productive optical telescope in the country. The number of papers we publish per year are second only to the 2-meter Himalayan Chandra telescope. We publish more than all the other optical telescopes in the country. As students taking a course, we are actually setting aside time on that telescope to get data to you so that you can learn. So make sure you utilize that opportunity really nicely. There are very few universities in the entire world. I'm not kidding. I've asked my colleagues. Okay, there are very few universities in the entire world which give an opportunity like this. So please make sure that you are not squandering that opportunity. Take that seriously. And yeah, don't cheat. That's the last requirement. That is one thing I can't stand at all. Don't cheat, don't copy. Again, you are here because you want to learn. That's all
Hello,
from me.
sir.
Yes, Akash.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm again. Did you say I'm an EP student and I was taking this as a department elective? So, did you
I
say?
would suggest that your CR should check with the HOD for the official stance. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, because it is in the handbook suggested as a department elective, and I think you said something contradicting to that.
Just check. There had been some discussion about this last year. I don't remember the final conclusion. That is why I'm saying, okay, so I'm really bad at remembering institute rules and so on. Okay, so the best bet is really to have the second and third year CRs talk to, or one of them talk to the department HOD and get it confirmed from them.
Thank you.
There had been some discussion. It may be allowed. There, it might not be allowed. So yeah. Jay has suggested taking a poll now for the slots. Not going to happen. Tried all these things in the past. Doesn't work. Sorry. Akhil is asking, will we be given a list of topics for the project? Good, you brought it up. Yes, we will give some suggestions for what projects can be done. We don't want you to select only those projects, but they will serve as starting points. So in every lecture, whenever we have covered something, I'll give you an example of something that was done with Growth India, either related to that topic or on some other topic. And we will indicate a few projects that could be done. Those who have other ideas are welcome to propose them. I strongly encourage discussing with TAs or with students who have taken this course first. There are also a few other students here who are people who have done research projects with me, so they will also be able to guide you on this. Right now, I can see Vedant is here and Param is here. Kriti may also be here. So there are several students who actually have worked with me before, and several of them have some experience with Growth India. So you could contact them as well. We will have live lectures, and what platform would be used for information exchange? Yes, we will have live lectures just like this one. The course notes and everything, I prefer putting them on Moodle. So all the notes that I was taking on my tablet, those will be made into a PDF and they'll be shared on Moodle. The lecture recording itself, I know Microsoft has done quite a bit to let you see it on Teams, but I think the most robust platform is actually YouTube. So I'm going to download these lectures and put them on YouTube so that you can watch them on whatever device you have, whatever bandwidth you have. So the forum, you are welcome to use the channels here for discussion. There are 3 channels. General should mainly be kept for announcements and stuff. There's a channel for discussions where you can discuss any questions you have about various astro topics, and there's a projects channel where you can discuss queries about projects. We can add more channels later if required, but there will be a lot of content on Moodle as well. Okay, so I see no more questions in the chat. I see a couple of hands up, but I presume there are still hands which were raised long ago and have not been lowered.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Aditya, can you repeat the question, please?
No, I just said but yeah. So I was asking, what is the policy on audit, if you have any?
Who can audit the course? Anyone that the Acad office allows can audit the course. What do you have to do to get the audit grade? You have to do the course as if you were crediting it. If you pass, you get the grade. Otherwise, you don't.
Thank you.
Your voice is breaking up quite a bit. Can you type your question in the chat, please, Aditya? Not really. It seems to be a connectivity issue.
Okay, no problem. I got the message. Thank you.
Okay. Parth and Param, do you have any new questions or were your hands raised from last time?
Last time, so sorry.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's session. We are actually ending 3 minutes early. How about that?
Sir, there are some questions
Yes.
in chat box.
Okay.
I have put it.
So, yes, why are all planets around the sun in a plane? And so this is something which we will discuss when we are studying the solar system soon after midsems. Is there only one project or multiple? No, there are multiple projects, and I will introduce some possible projects, maybe one in each lecture, and then there will be dedicated lecture about discussing projects and proposals and so on. So don't worry, we are not going to just throw you into the wild and say go survive, Bear Grylls style. We'll guide you around as to how to do this.
Okay, sir.
What would be the rough timeline of topics to be covered? We are going to start with stars, and after stars, stellar evolution, and so on. After that, we will come to some of the tools, and we will start looking at your projects again as to how to make sure that you have enough background to be able to execute those projects. And then after the midsem, okay, give me just a moment. Where did that go? I've lost the note where I'd written all of this down, but that's okay. I remember it. So after studying stars and stellar structure and evolution and variables and binaries and so on, we'll then come and learn about telescopes and detectors, a little bit about coordinate systems. Then we'll come to the solar system after midsem. And finally, all the special topic lectures will be kept in the end. So I know that the last month of your semester gets very, very busy. A lot of people will give you a lot of quizzes and assignments and so on. So what we are going to do is we are going to keep our assignments and all the heavy lifting earlier in the course, and we'll try to make sure that the last 3 weeks or so are relatively lighter, so that your load will be balanced out against other courses.
So the projects will typically start around the midsems and before the
No, the
midsems?
projects will actually start around the end of January. Your data acquisition will happen just before midsems, and then your reports would be due roughly a month after midsems, roughly speaking. The exact timeline and stuff we will actually, revise, work on and revise as we are going through. So this is just the rough idea. So nominally, the idea is that during midsem weeks we should be able to acquire data so that it's all done, or maybe before that if possible. And as soon as the midsem is done, you should be in a position to analyze it and move on.
Okay.
All right, we are past the hour, so let's end here. Feel free to add questions, anything that you have on Moodle, and talk to you all next week, Tuesday, 3:30. Bye.